Good morning and welcome to day 3 of the art and microbes portion of tacos. Today we are going to start by looking at what you did yesterday. So if you can go grab the 2 pieces of cloth you made yesterday. Then we're going to look at some examples of different types of photograms, how people have done crazy things with them over the years, and look at some professional examples, how people arrange leaves and flowers and other things like that. Then we're going to talk about elements of design, so different ways of putting together the objects that you have onto a cloth. And finally, we're going to make some exposures, including a new type of exposure where we work with both sides of the sheet of paper, or the cloth in this case. So we're going to have a lot of fun. First, though, I want to look at what you did yesterday. So I'm going to switch over to the other view. All right, so we've got to center those up a little bit. These are the 2 cloths that we did yesterday. So this was the first one, and this was the second one. The first one, as you see, is a little lighter than the other one. I think this was from that bleaching in the sun I talked about. You also have to make sure, I noticed, that you really do get them washed nicely. If you pull them out and in the white areas you see a little bit of yellow, that's leftover chemicals from the cyanotype solution in there. So if you see that after it dries, go ahead and just stick it back into the bucket of water, wash it around a little bit, squeeze it out, maybe get some fresh water in there, and then put it back out to dry again. These things dry so quickly in the sun that it's not really a big deal. I actually just washed them again right before we started doing this. So both of these have pretty large blank areas and decent amounts of blue area. This, as I said, was the first one, and not shockingly, I like this one better. I like how it's got 2 large elements with little things around it, and I like also how we're using the edges. So edges can be really important in compositions like this, especially in photography. Making things go all the way to the edge, make them go off the edge, which implies that there's a larger space to it. It implies that it's part of a larger thing rather than just an object sitting in the middle. So I sort of like how that looks. That's really nice. It also is, pretty nice with how it goes into the frayed edge of the cloth right there. Over on this guy, it's a little bit, out of balance, just this one large object and a couple of things there and there. We're going to play around with filling that in tomorrow. I think that could be really cool to do. So we'll do some experiments with that. But in the meantime, I think smaller things are going to look better. Things where you don't have large expanses of white. Or in the case today, I'll be working with colored cloth, even though you guys are still going to be working with white cloth, because I've run out of white cloth. I gave you guys all my white cloth. And I didn't have to leave any, keep any for myself. So I'm going to have to go with some of the colored pieces that I have. So it'll look a little different than what you have, so don't get confused by that. But anyway, just look at yours and see what you think. See if you think that it's interesting. Do you like this? Would you put it up on a wall? Is there, if you move something a little bit to the side, if I took this one and moved it just a little bit this way or a little bit that way, would it be a little better balance? Because then I'd have one up there and then one sort of pushed off to the side away from it. That might be a nicer balance for the image. So think about things like that. Show it to your mom, show it to your dad, show it to your sister or brother if you have them, and get their feedback on it and say, which do you like better? What do you like? And we can also always come back and compare these to the ones that we did on the first day. So again, very clean, slightly more chaotic, very different types of exposures. So lots of different little things to look at. All right, now as I said, we're going to look at elements of design, and we're going to look at photograms and how people have done crazy things with photograms over the years. All right, before we get into making some more images, we're going to talk today about photograms, what we're making now, a little bit about cyanotypes, and a little bit about elements of design. And we're going to do it by looking at some other people's pictures, some images that I pulled out from the history of photograms and cyanotypes, and that just sort of illustrate these design things that we're going to be interested in. We're starting way back in the past with Anna Atkins, who was the first person to really use photograms in an interesting way. They were invented right before her by Sir John Herschel. And then she was the first person to use them. And I really love her pictures because she was collecting seaweed and other things from around the coast of England and making straight photograms of them. One thing that was really beautiful about them is if you look at the bottom, she would write down the scientific name on a little piece of acetate. She would write it with black ink. on the acetate and then place it on the bottom of the sheet of paper underneath the seaweed when she made the exposure. That way it was printed into it. You can see that faint little silhouette around it where the acetate, or more likely it was just a very thin sheet of paper, blocked the light a little bit, but not completely. And she had such beautiful handwriting. I don't have remotely as nice handwriting, so I can't do something like that. Maybe you guys have incredible handwriting. You can try this out. But it's really beautiful, and I like how it worked. You can see a slightly larger one here as well. And she was working very simply. She would place her images right in the middle, sometimes combining two of them with lots of empty space around and using this beautiful blue to good effect. These are some other photographers who relied mostly on their subject being really cool and interesting. So you can sometimes either have a really cool thing that you're putting down on the paper, and that's what brings the interest, or you can have how you compose it and how you put it together, and that's what makes it interesting. So on the left, obviously a bat, that's pretty awesome. And on the right, some talons, some sort of legs of a bird of some sort. Looks like the bones though, so it's probably rotten away a little bit. These are dead animals that this artist would find on the side of the highway down in New Mexico where he lives, and place onto photo paper. This is not cyanotype, this is other types of photographs. And we're going to sort of look at a whole lot of different things, including some just normal photographs to think about this idea here. So here is a flattened lizard that he found. This is another crazy photographer who does photograms. These are photograms just like yours, but they're much bigger and they're very different. And this is his baby. He would place his baby on a huge sheet of photo paper and then flash it with light, and you get the light coming around it and making this really cool image of the baby. He did the same thing with snakes. So he'd freeze time with it and get really crazy colors. So looking at elements of design, there are lots of elements of design. There are lots of ways to think about designing and keeping control of the different things on the sheet of paper that you're putting down. We're just going to look at a couple really simple things. So positive, negative space. This is the white versus the blue. Or when we get to the colored paper, the blue versus the red or the yellow or the pink. So using a lot of blue space or not much blue space. Sometimes it's really nice to have huge amounts of empty space on an image and just one little thing tucked away in a corner. Repetition, taking one element and just repeating it over and over again. So in those first images, if any of you grab grass and sort of spread grass around the page, that would be a repetition of a single form. And that can be really beautiful. You think about it in terms of like wallpaper or other things, but it can be really interesting to use that. Balance, taking two things and balancing them against each other, or taking an object and making a circle around it. So some sort of way to make the right and the left or the top and the bottom similar to each other. And rhythm. Rhythm's a little more abstract and weird, but just the idea of elements that come and go. So large, small, and some sort of pattern. So we're going to look at a bunch of images now and maybe mention what they might be using, why they might be working and interesting. So these are some more photograms. These are some flowers, and you notice there are 4 of them spread out across. It's a horizontal image, so the 4 of them take up a really nice amount of the page, and they're also very beautiful flowers. On the left, something that's just cool. If you can recognize that, that's a dragonfly. And then on the right, orange slices or lemon slices placed in different areas around the page. So if you could go out and find yourself some jellyfish, you could make an image like this, or you could really just actually use plastic bags and make them look like jellyfish, and you can really do cool things with that. But again, single objects or a couple objects and then a lot of blank space around them, and trying to make them nicely centered or pushed a little bit off to the side. It's sometimes nice to push things to one side or to the other side to make it more interesting. A couple things balanced. I'd say the one on the left, not that interesting. It's a little out of balance. It's got really nice detail and then these sort of large objects. So it doesn't work quite as well as the one on the right where you have 3 feathers, 3 really nice feathers, big one in the middle, 2 little ones. They're angled to take up the whole page. Here are a couple different random ones. The one in the middle is a whole bunch of different cyanotypes, but very simple. Everyone pretty similar to another, so working in a pattern. So this is repetition, where The photographer's taking the same thing again and again and again, using line on the left. I don't know what that is. Looks like a cobweb of some sort, but a really crystalline, like the most OCD spider I've ever seen, making a cobweb there. And then gears, large, small, repeated over and over and over again. This is a friend of mine who does what she calls nature piles. So these are obviously not photograms or cyanotypes, but she just finds things and makes little circles out of them. Objects, different types of things that she thinks are really interesting. And you can do this with a cyanotype. So if you imagine on the one with the flowers, if you picked a whole bunch of flowers and made little circles out of them, that could look really beautiful, really interesting. Same with parts of shells or rocks here. Probably not shells in Wyoming. She lives in Hong Kong, where there's a lot of beaches, and she can collect shells like this, but rocks would be another way to go here. This is a very famous artist named Andy Goldsworthy, who makes wonderful, wonderful things out of rocks and leaves and other things. And if any parents are watching right now, if you're looking for a documentary about art that your child might love, it's called Rivers and Tides, I think. I'll put it up at the end or on a later one. It's by Andy Goldsworthy is the name. And it's a beautiful documentary looking at making art in nature. But he collects things and he piles them up and he makes patterns out of them. He uses color beautifully. Obviously, we can't do that, but repetition as well, and these forms, these centralized shapes like this. So absolutely beautiful. And something to think about, like taking a bunch of different leaves and putting them into patterns based on the type of leaf that they are. That could be a way to go. And this obviously we can't do, but using sticks and twigs in a different way. Twigs, you know, they're sort of boring, but they're also straight lines. And so if you take a whole lot of little twigs and place them around your sheet of cloth or paper, you could do interesting patterns like this. This is actually in the water. If you see, it's half of that is a reflection. It's an amazing sculpture that he built into the water, attaching these branches together. And then the tide came in slowly and it disappeared. It was a very ephemeral, that means there for only a small period of time, sculpture that just slowly got washed away and disappeared. So we're going to go from this to starting to make some images today. Yeah, I'll be back to you in a moment. All right, the wind has picked up today a little bit, so we got to be careful, but we're ready to make our first exposure of the day. I've got the cloth in my pocket, so I'm just going to pull the cloth out, spread it out across here. This is the orange cloth, which you will get to see soon. I'm going to spread these guys out onto it. And then get the plexiglass down onto it as quick as I can. And we're going to let that sit. We're going to give it 9 minutes, just like we did at the end of yesterday, and see what this exposure looks like. All right, the exposure's done. We're going to pull it apart. I'm going to keep all of these things because we're going to use them in our next exposure. Dump them into here. And get this covered up, and we're going to walk it over to here. Okay, so again, full dunk in. This is the orange cloth, so it's pretty dark. So you can't actually see too much. Give it a very good wash though. Okay, that's about done. So as you see, there's the image. It's not as separated as I would want, but it's a little bit of a random pattern. So we could play around with that and try to get more separation. I think that would look nicer. But one of the interesting things about this is, let's look at the other side. The other side is just the straight up dark green color. So this is the green cloth, not the orange cloth. We can use the other side. So for this next exposure, we're going to make 2 different exposures. We're going to make an exposure on one side and then flip it over and make the exposure on the other side and then process the whole thing. So it's going to take twice as long, but it'll give us 2 different images, one on each side, and we can juxtapose them against each other. We can have a very big image on one side and then lots of little things on the other. So for this, I'm going to collect some other little things. I'm going to collect little twigs, and so I'll pull those together. And for the first exposure, we'll spread the twigs all over one side of it, make that image, and then I'll brush the twigs away, flip it over, and then I'm going to put a larger microbe on the other side of it, and we'll see what the 2 of those things look like together. All right, so as I said, for this exposure, I'm going to start on one side. I'm going to spread out a whole bunch of twigs. I'll try to do a little better spreading this time around, working as quick as possible. Use my shadow a tiny bit over this. It is windy today. Pretty hard to work. Okay, let's get it covered up. And now we are going to give it a full 9 minutes. And when the exposure's done, I'm going to brush those off, flip it over, put a microbe on the other side, just one nice big one right in the middle, and then make that exposure as well. And then after that, we'll process it. All right, so the time's up now, but instead of taking this to process it, we're just going to flip it over. So I'm pulling this guy off. I'm going to push all these guys around, flip it over, and then I'm going to place this guy. And instead of putting it right in the middle like I could, which would be the obvious thing to do, I'm going to put it right off to the side here so it looks like he's swimming through a larger open area, and that could look pretty interesting. So this is using negative space around the outside of it to create more interest in the image. If it's right in the middle, it's just about the object. It's just about that little microbe. But if it's off to the side like that, it becomes more about the microbe and a larger space, which is more fun. All right, so I'm going to cover that up, and we're going to give this another 9 minutes, and then we're going to process it and look at it. Okay, so this exposure finished. Katla's going to pick it up, pull the microbe off of it, crumple it up, make sure that it's not going anywhere, and let's see if we can chase after her. All right, drop it in. Drop it. All right. Whoa. There it goes. I'm going to reach my hand in and squeeze it a couple times. And this should have a beautiful image on each side. What do you think's on one side, Kyle?
Microbe.
What's on the other side?
Sticks.
The sticks. Microbe sticks? Is that what they are?
Yeah, microbe stick.
A microbe stick? What's a microbe stick?
I don't know.
Neither do I. Let's find out. All right, I'm gonna grab it. And Katla, could you spread it out on the ground? Oh, this is the pink cloth.
Pink, I thought it was.
Is the pink cloth your favorite?
Yes.
All righty. All right, let's hold it up to one side. There is Mr. Microbe or Mrs. Microbe. Ms. Microbe, call her. Mrs. Microbe. And hold me the other side, Katla. Show me the other side.
That's the side that I'm looking at.
All right, show us the other side. Flip it around, please. And there are the sticks, which look like tiny little microbes. If you come bring it back to me for a second, and let's look at the microbe again. Microbe, flip it. So if you look at the microbe, you can actually see the sticks coming through the microbe in an interesting way. Right there, there's some lines on it. And that's one of the things that we're gonna work on tomorrow. So tomorrow's exposures, Kyla's apparently running off with it, and it's gone. Tomorrow's exposures, we're gonna look at double exposures, where we carve out a large space and then fill it in with another shape, which is gonna be a lot of fun. So yeah, one thing that you could do now, you have an extra cloth or two, so you can make one more image if you want. But another useful thing would be to take some of the, or let's spread this out on the ground, Kyle, let it dry, would be to take some of the, anywhere, big spot, take one of the pieces of cardboard, construction paper, and cut out some more microbes from that construction paper. So maybe make some really elaborate ones, large ones, small ones, different sizes. Cut them all out and have them ready to go for when we come back tomorrow. All right? The other thing would be to make sure these dry nicely, and then we'll look at them first thing tomorrow and discuss them and see what they look like once they're dry. All right, have a good night.